Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Lee Halliday, and in this video we are going to test a function that uses fetch. And specifically we're going to learn how to mock it and see how you handle all of that with Jest. What is mocking and why would you want to do it? Well, when you're running your test, there's a few reasons you wouldn't want to make real HTTP calls. Number one, because they're a little slow. So if you got a lot of tests, they're all making calls, your tests are going to take a while. Number two, the responses aren't consistent. In this case, we're calling to get the rates converting a currency from, say, USD to CAD, to Canadian dollar. It's changing every day, so you could never really write a test because you don't know what value you're going to get back. Number three, whoever owns this API, even if it's yourself, may not appreciate getting a ton of API calls every time their CI services is running through the test suite. So that's what we're going to cover today. Testing this convert function in Jest. This is part one of, I believe, 3 short videos I'll release. This one we're going to do it all manually ourselves, just using Jest. In the second one, we'll look at a better way where we use a package to take care of the heavy lifting for us. And number 3, we're going to look at what happens when you use or call this function from within some React code. How can you test that React component that makes a call to a function that calls fetch? So to get going, we've got this currency file here. I'm going to spin up our tests in the terminal below so we can see the results. And I'm going to create currency.test.js. So in here, I will import the function I'm testing. So import convert from currency. And we will write an it test. So it converts USD to CAD. And we will put our function in here that's run. So the first thing we're going to need to do is make this async because we're dealing with promises here. 2 actually. The first one is awaiting the first fetch response. Then once we have that, we have to wait another as we sort of call the JSON function to convert that response into an object that we can deal with. So what we'll do is we will call our function. So const rate is await the converting of USD to CAD. And then we'll write that we expect the rate to equal 1.42. So if I run this, what you'll see, hopefully if it works, the response we get back, it expected 1.42, but we got 1.41, blah, blah, blah. And that's the actual exchange rate on today. So we made the real API call. We got back a value that's really hard to test for because it's going to change all the time. It's slow, etc. So what we want to do is replace fetch with like a fake mocked out version of fetch. So there are a number of ways to do this in Jest. You can create a folder __mocks __. But that really only works if you're importing a module into your code. In this case, fetch is available globally. So what we're going to do is actually just access the global fetch, and we're going to replace it with a fake version. So we'll say we're going to place this with jest.fn. So this is a way you can sort of create fake or mock function calls in Jest. And what we want to do is think about, in this case, what does fetch look like? So fetch returns a promise. So that's the first thing. We need to resolve a promise. And the data it resolves with contains JSON, which is a function that can be called. And if we look here, we get our response, we call JSON on it, await, which means it's another promise. So we have to promise.resolve again. And then we need to think about what data we're expecting to receive back. So in this case, it's an object with a rate attribute, and then we dynamically access whatever destination currency we're working with, in this case, CAD. So we respond with rates, object, CAD, and then 1.42, like that. So when this test runs again, it now passes because it's not using the sort of standard global fetch. It's using this mocked out function that we created here. So because it's a mocked out function, you get some additional sort of superpowers. You can expect and test like how many times it was called, what did it receive when it was called. So we'll work on that right now. We can say expect fetch to have been called times. So one time, right? So if we say 2, we'll make sure it fails and then we'll fix it, and there we go. So we expected 2, but it was only called once. So if it's important to know that your code is actually executing or calling a function, you can write a test for that. So why don't we test the other side of this currency function where you see it's wrapped in a try catch. So if anything in here fails and raises an exception, we'll catch it and just return null here. So we need to mock out the promise being rejected, so a failure. So it handles rejection or exception with null. So again, we got async function in here. And this time we need to override sort of this standard global fetch override here. So override the override and just change it just for this function or this test in here. So what we can do is we can say fetch.mock implementation once. So just override it one time. And what are we going to override it with? We will override it with a promise.reject. So reject immediately. We'll just say API failure. So that's our setup. We need to actually call the function we're testing. So I'll wait a call to convert from USD to CAD. And let's check that the value we get back matches what we're expecting. So expect rate to equal null. So if we save this, we can make sure that it's working as expected. Cool. And we can also say expect fetch to have been called with. So you can even test what arguments were passed to your fetch call as it was called inside of this function here. So I'm just going to copy this string over, and we can replace the variable here for base to USD. And when we run this, we'll make sure that it's still passing. There we go. So in this test, we overrode the global fetch to create a mocked version of it that sort of responded in the normal signature we're used to dealing with, the double promises in fetch. We tested it once here, sort of the happy path, and then we tested that our function handles the failure path. There's one more thing you might want to do, is basically in between tests, reset any mocks, because you may run into issues when you're checking like how many times it was called, if it's sort of retaining values between tests. So what we can do is implement the before each function, function that receives a function that's provided with Jest to basically do something before each time a test is run. And what we can do is we can say fetch mock clear. So basically start from scratch every time you run these tests. And there we go. It's all still passing. So this has been video 1, how to mock, fetch, and test code that makes HTTP calls. And in the next video, what we're going to be looking at specifically is, I deleted it, but it's called like, I forget what it's called. It's a package specifically for testing code in fetch, testing fetch in Jest. Sorry, that's a mouthful. So we're going to take a look at that, and then the third video will be how can we test React components using React testing library that calls code that makes fetch calls. So I hope to see you around for that. I'll share the code and links in the bottom for you to sort of get access to the code that I was going over here. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye.